Hello, and you're listening to WPPMLP in Philadelphia, and you're watching on PhillyCam TV on Verizon and Comcast. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber, and this is the People Power Lunch Hour Show. On today's show, we are going to be talking about the lack of affordable housing here in Philadelphia, and we'll be talking to two people representing organizations that are doing advocacy and offering programs and resources on this issue. We'll be talking to Christi Clark, the organizing director of the Women's Community Revitalization Project, and Tom Earle, the CEO of Liberty Resources. We'll have all that and more on this episode of the People Power Lunch Hour Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the People Power Lunch Hour Show. I'm Vanessa Maria Graber, your host, and we're here live from PhillyCam in our Center City studios. And today we are going to be talking about housing here in Philadelphia, and more specifically, the lack of affordable housing, especially to people experiencing poverty in the city. I'd like to welcome to our show our two featured guests, Christi Clark. She's the organizing director of the Women's Community Revitalization Project, and she's also the coordinator of the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities. And also with me is Tom Earle, the CEO of Liberty Resources, and he also serves on the steering committee for the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Thank you for all the work that you do, for your advocacy and services that you provide to the community. I want to talk with Christi first, and she's with the Women's Community Revitalization Project. They're committed to social and economic equity for low-income women and their families. They develop affordable housing, provide supportive services, advocacy for policy change, and honor and promote leadership, dignity, and justice in our communities. Tell us a little bit more about the Women's Community Revitalization Project and how it came about.
Thank you. I'd love to. The Women's Community Revitalization Project has been around for 32 years. We were started by a group of women in North Philly, east of Broad Street, Eastern North. And these were women who really recognized the need for deeply affordable rental housing in their communities. They actually organized a Community Reinvestment Act challenge against a bank. And through that, got some resources to develop some housing, give it to women in the community, and from there started the organization. And it's really about serving low-income women and their families. Now we have about 300 units of low-income rental housing. Most of our tenants make between $8,000 and $12,000 a year. And in addition to building affordable housing for folks, we also do community organizing.
Thank you. And now we have Tom Earle, the CEO of Liberty Resources. They're also the Center for Independent Living in Philadelphia. They advocate for and work with persons with disabilities to ensure their civil rights and equal access to all aspects of life in the community. Tell us a little bit more about Liberty Resources.
Yes, Vanessa. Liberty Resources is a federally funded center for independent living through the Administration on Community Living. And we're a very mission-driven organization that seeks to have people with disabilities live as independently as possible in a community setting as opposed to institutional settings. Historically, many people with disabilities, especially low-income people with disabilities, were forced to live in restrictive nursing facilities and other institutional settings like Philadelphia Nursing Home. And over the years, Liberty Resources, as a Center for Independent Living, has really advocated and worked very hard to rebalance our long-term care system funded by Medicaid to make it balanced towards community living arrangements and people with disabilities living in their own apartments and homes instead of in nursing homes. We provide a core group of services, and they include information and referral, peer-to-peer counseling, where a person with a disability who has lived through an experience before will provide guidance and insight to a fellow person with a disability who's facing similar challenges. We also provide advocacy and focus our advocacy in expanding the funding for community-based programs, including housing. And then we do skills training, where folks with disabilities learn new skills designed to help them live as independently as possible. And then the last core service is a very important one, and that is transitional services that include transitioning youth, young people who are going through the public education system and entering, once they leave the high school setting, learning independent living skills. And then, of course, nursing home transition work, where we transition 20 to 30 people each year to live independently in the community. And a big challenge there is the lack of affordable and accessible housing in the city of Philadelphia for the folks that we move out of nursing homes.
Thank you both for providing our listeners and our viewers with an overview of your organizations, two great organizations to learn more about. I want to ask you both more broadly to outline some of the barriers or challenges that exist for your respective populations when it comes to getting accessible housing. We know there's a lack of affordable housing opportunities, but what are some of the other barriers that women and people living with disabilities experience when trying to live independently and either rent a home or buy a home? Christi, we'll start with you first.
Yeah, I mean, really the biggest barrier is the lack of decent quality, affordable housing that's also accessible for folks who have disabilities. And when we talk about affordability, we're really looking at folks paying no more than 30% of their income on their housing costs. When we look at WCRP's tenants, that's Women's Community Revitalization Project, WCRP's tenants, our folks make between $8,000 and $12,000 a year when they come to live with us. So when we are looking at low incomes, which is a significant portion of Philadelphians. And so to be able to find rents that are only 30% of that income in order for people to be stably housed and also be able to afford other basic needs like childcare, transportation, food, that's really one of the most significant challenges.
And Tom, what about for people living with disabilities?
For people living with disabilities, it's really a double whammy because the affordability is a huge challenge, similar to WCRP's constituents, the folks we serve with Liberty Resources, who are folks with disabilities, are also on low fixed monthly incomes, often Social Security, disability benefits, and public assistance. So they're typically earning well below 30% of area median income. These are our most vulnerable seniors and people with disabilities who often have to make difficult choices with their monthly budgets between what they can do with housing and other costs, their food and groceries, utilities, and prescription co-pays and public transportation. So those low-income challenges or poverty challenges are very real for the people we serve. So we compound that problem with the reality that Philadelphia is one of the first cities in the country. It's a colonial city, very large geographically, and the housing stock in Philadelphia is very old. As one of the oldest cities, we see neighborhood after neighborhood with many row homes that all present one or two steps in front of the front door. So folks with disabilities, in particular folks who are using wheelchairs, really have the architectural barrier challenges of accessibility in those apartments and homes that they're seeking to live in. So that's why we've pushed through the various housing initiatives that we've done over the past 2 decades or so to always include accessibility as an important part of that advocacy.
Thank you. Tom, you serve on the steering committee for the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities, and Christy, you're the coordinator of it. You've worked recently on a campaign called Development Without Displacement. And because gentrification and rapidly expanding development in the city is something we talk a lot about here at PhillyCam, tell our listeners and viewers more about that campaign and what you're trying to do.
Yeah, maybe I can start with telling a little bit more about the coalition, and Tom, you can jump in on the campaign.
Sure.
So the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities, we've been working together for about 5 years. There are 65 organizations from around the city that are a part of that coalition. It's a really wonderful mix of community, disability, faith, labor, and urban agriculture groups. And a lot of us have been working together for decades and really been fighting for two things that we need from this city to expand affordable and accessible housing. It's money and land. I actually don't wish it was more complicated. It's pretty simple, but coming up with the policy solutions to get us more money and land has been complicated. So this coalition, we came together to really fight for more resources for the city's housing trust fund, and Tom can tell us more about that.
Sure. As one of the founding steering members of the Coalition for Affordable Communities, Liberty Resources has been very devoted in community organizing and recruiting new members for the Coalition. And the idea is to seek additional funding for the Housing Trust Fund. Our Housing Trust Fund, which was started back in 2006 and passed City Council, was a very innovative piece of legislation for the city and has some very key requirements to address the issue of affordable, accessible housing. One, it requires that 50% of the money in the Housing Trust Fund is devoted for housing development to meet the housing needs of people earning 30% of area median income or less. Another requirement that was very important to Liberty Resources is that units of housing be accessible and also visitable. These are very important elements for people with disabilities, especially people who use wheelchairs. The Housing Trust Fund is funded through the recording fees in the city of Philadelphia. And that typically has been between about $12 and $14 million a year. And we, as a coalition, acknowledge that the funding levels for the Housing Trust Fund have historically not been sufficient to meet the need and the growing need for affordable, accessible housing in Philadelphia. And through the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities, one of our primary objectives is to come up with additional funding sources for the city of Philadelphia to put into the Housing Trust Fund to expand the scope of the trust fund.
Yeah, and so we're really excited because recently we just were part of a campaign to win $70 million more for the city's housing trust fund. And that was a compromise bill between the mayor and city council. And so we were excited to see that amount of money go into the Housing Trust Fund, but the city has only made a commitment for 5 years. And so we're really thinking ahead about how do we make sure that the money that's coming in for housing goes beyond those 5 years, because we know we're not going to resolve our housing crisis in that time. We also know that council made some changes to what the Housing Trust Fund can do that no longer requires that half of the money go to low-income households. And Tom keeps mentioning area median income. So for listeners who don't know what that is, it is the way the federal government determines what the median income is for a specific area. For Philadelphia, that also actually includes a bunch of the collar counties around the city. And so the median income is pretty high. It's about $89,000 a year for a family of four. But if we look at just the city of Philadelphia, the median income is $39,000 a year for a family of four. So when Tom talks about folks earning 30% of the area, we're really talking about a really large portion of the city of Philadelphia.
Yeah, that seems very high for the median income. And that's because they're like the federal like census areas, if I recall correctly. I want to take a short break. And when we come back, I want to talk more about how you're involving people who are impacted by these policies in your organizing and talk to our listeners more about how they might potentially plug into this work. You're listening and watching to the People Power Lunch Hour here at PhillyCam and on WPPM. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the People Power Lunch Hour. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber. We're here at PhillyCam in the WPPM studios here in Center City. This month's theme of our show is all about access to housing here in Philadelphia. And for the last 15 minutes or so, I've been talking to Christi Clark, the organizing director of the Women's Community Revitalization Project, and Tom Earle, the CEO of Liberty Resources. They've been outlining some of the work that they've been doing through their respective organizations in terms of advocating and making housing more accessible to their constituents. They've had some recent victories working with the city to allocate more funds to go towards affordable housing. And I'd like to know from them, what are the different ways that they connect with, organize, and involve the people most impacted by these policies? Christi, tell us a little bit about the volunteers that you work with and the mechanisms you use to involve them in sharing their voice and fighting for access alongside with all of you.
Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities really prioritizes following the leadership of people who are directly impacted by the issues, and specifically around housing insecurity in our city. Folks get involved in the coalition through the organizations that they are a part of, and we really work with all the 65 organizations in our coalition to work on leadership development for folks. And people can get plugged in a lot of ways. Like, we have folks who show up just to show up. We show our people power through our numbers. And so some of how people get involved is by showing up to City Hall when we go, sometimes to chant and sometimes to testify. So folks will show up. People will hold signs, but then we also have people who testify at hearings in front of city council, folks who will speak at rallies or other events, people who talk to the press, and we also have folks who talk directly to our elected officials, both to share their personal stories and to share the demands for our coalition.
Tom, many of the people that are involved with Liberty Resources are doing a lot, especially working at the federal level as well, in addition to working here locally. Talk about some of the advocacy work that you're doing and how you all involve people from the disabilities community.
Sure. One of the keystone features of Centers for Independent Living is our federal mandate to include people with disabilities at the table with what we do. We are required to have 51% of our staff be people with disabilities. And from a board governance perspective, we're required to have 51% of our staff of our board be people with significant disabilities. So the participation is sort of designed into the Center for Independent Living, and this dates back to the original sort of founding of the independent living movement by Ed Roberts, who was the one of the first founders of the independent living movement in California in the 70s. And the mantra is nothing about us without us. And that requires that people with disabilities have a seat at the table when it comes to policies involving human services, supports, programs for people with disabilities, and also housing and housing advocacy. So we try to be involved at the local, state, and national level. And at the national level, housing is really touches the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. And a big challenge that all of us face, including our coalition and the city of Philadelphia, has historically been the decrease in federal funding for housing programs, including housing vouchers that are used to help subsidize the rental costs for people with disabilities and other low-income tenants.
In addition to housing, Christy, the Women's Community Revitalization Project has also been involved in facilities development, so other types of building. Can you talk about some of those projects?
Yeah, for sure. We really base our development and our organizing work based on community needs. We really start a lot of our work through neighborhood listening projects. And this is really about doing relational interviews with people, really understanding what their priorities are and what they need. And so as we've done our work in neighborhoods, there's been more than just housing that folks have needed. So we've done things like build childcare centers and healthcare institutions when folks in the neighborhood have prioritized that.
Yeah, and if you look at their website, they have participated in a number of community builds, such as Congresos, the Latinos Unidos headquarters, the North Square Civic Association, the Children's Village Child Care Center, Delaware Valley Community Health, Lincoln Day Educational Center, and more. So again, thinking housing as broader than just where you live, but also the spaces that you occupy and utilize throughout your work week. And that includes other places like libraries and schools and community centers. So all these things are interconnected. I want to talk more broadly about gentrification in the city and its impact and how it displaces people from those neighborhoods. I think that a lot of us have seen how West Philadelphia has changed and a good bit of North Philadelphia. Are there ways that we can compete with that rapidly expanding housing? The construction seems to go up, and how do we make sure that all of these homes that are being built are accessible and that portions of them are going to people that can actually afford to pay for them, and even to renters, right? Because not everyone's able to purchase homes. Like what's the future hold? Can we be optimistic about this? Are there specific things that we should be fighting for as residents of the city who care about this issue?
Yeah, I think to begin with, we should be optimistic because we know that when we fight, we win. And there are a lot of folks who are really working on building the people power to hold our elected officials accountable to really doing what is needed for the community. So we know some of the tools that we need, right? We need land that is going out to deeply affordable housing development and for other specific community needs like gardens and farms. And we also need more resources from the city. We need to be prioritizing our money where the community needs are, which includes low income and accessible housing. Another tool that I want to mention that really helps stem displacement is community land trusts. So the Women's Community Revitalization Project has started the Community Justice Land Trust, and that came out of a community engagement process in North Philly. And the idea behind community land trusts is that homes built on those will be affordable forever. So, for example, in Point Breeze, we are soon going to be breaking ground on our first 5 homeownership units as part of our community land trust. They'll sell for about $150,000 directly across the street from homes that are selling for $650,000. And they will be affordable to folks at the income level that can afford to purchase that forever. And so that really is a really powerful anti-displacement tool.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about here. Because these neighborhoods are being taken over by the blocks, and it seems difficult to even think like that you too could be able to live in these neighborhoods at the rates that they're currently going for. And neighborhoods where homes were $100,000 or less are now turning into neighborhoods that are over $500,000. And then that also increases the taxes that people have to pay in those neighborhoods. Tom, I wanted to ask you about how to, maintain your independence. And in addition to helping people secure housing that's accessible and affordable, talk about some of the other programs and services that you provide to help people with employment and transportation, because those things are interrelated as well. You can't have somebody living on the edge of the city if they're not able to go to work and if they're going to be disconnected from their families.
Yes, we really look at independent living sort of universally using a term we call community integration. And the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is the civil rights law of people with disabilities, really has 2 themes. One is equal opportunity, and that really focuses particularly on employment opportunities for people with disabilities and prohibits employers from discriminating against people with disabilities and hiring and promoting them in the workplace. It also requires them to affirmatively accommodate an individual with the disabilities in the workplace so they can perform the essential functions of the job. That could be flex time, removing architectural barriers in the workplace, and so on. The community integration mandate of the ADA really looks at other aspects of independent living, including accessible housing, but also things like public transportation and making sure that the SEPTA system, both the bus routes, the regional rail, the Earle, and all of the other parts of the transit system in the Philadelphia area are accessible to people with disabilities, including those who use wheelchairs, and making sure that businesses in the communities are accessible, that you can get into restaurants, get into community health centers, that they don't have architectural barriers that prohibit or prevent somebody who uses a wheelchair from getting in. So it's really a multi-piece of a puzzle, and the puzzle really has lots of pieces that make up what we call community integration and the capacity of a community to sustain people with disabilities living in it. So it's quite a challenge in Philadelphia. The streets have a lot of potholes. There's curb cuts that may be difficult to use or are in disrepair or missing altogether. So the challenges that people with disabilities face in the city are really significant, but there is progress. And I have to say, through community organizing, in coalitions like the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities, we have been able to advance our issue perhaps more effectively than we would by ourselves as a single organization when we get the people power together with 62 other organizations. And the diversity of the coalition includes labor groups, churches, community groups, human service organizations, teachers. It's really a great example of diversity and delivers a powerful message when we show up and meet with elected officials and meet at City Council with our green People Power t-shirts. We're very well recognized, and I think we have a lot of work to do, but the victories have been significant.
Well, you've come to the right place here on the People Power Lunch Hour, and that's why we're featuring all of your work. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk more with Tom and Christi about renters and tenants' rights and some of the issues that arise once they're in their housing. Keep it locked here on WPPM 106.5 FM and Philly Cam TV. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the People Power Lunch Hour. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber. On today's show, we're talking about housing. We're featuring organizations here that are doing amazing work in terms of getting people connected to affordable housing and advocating for more affordable and accessible housing here in the city of Philadelphia. I'm here with Christi Clark, Organizing Director of the Women's Community Revitalization Project, and Tom Earle, the CEO of Liberty Resources. WCRP offers some supportive services to people who are renting. Chris is going to talk a little bit about that. And the reason why I wanted to highlight some of that work is because there's a lot of renters. They finally find an affordable home or apartment to go into, but then there's often barriers or issues that arise once they're living in those situations. You'll see on People Power Lunch Hours, page that we've also talked with people from the tenants union and community legal services, because there's a lot of renters here in Philadelphia that often have to fight for their rights and know their rights when it comes to the spaces that they are renting. Christi, you all do a little bit about that. Tell our listeners and viewers what kind of supportive services that you offer for families.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you raising issues for renters, because we are just transitioned in Philadelphia to be a majority renter city. This definitely is impactful for a lot of folks. At WCRP, because we serve low-income families, we also have a priority to provide supportive services to those families. So we have a wonderful team of folks, a small but mighty team, that works with all of our tenants, supporting those folks in terms of helping them get connected to additional services beyond what we can provide, programs that the city offers, making sure that people are supported to think through their budgets for the year. And then a lot of times, too, helping people get on track with rent payments. We know that a lot of families, even once they're stably housed, still have a lot of choices to make in terms of where their very limited resources go, and really trying to work with folks to make sure that they can continue to stay stably housed.
That's great, because is it important to pay your rent on time and have enough for the electricity, the gas, the internet, and many other things that you need in your home? Tom, tell us a little bit some of the support that you provide for people that are connected with the Center for Independent Living when it comes to addressing issues with their housing situation, especially in terms of accessibility.
Sure. For people with disabilities who are living in the community, including the folks that we move out of nursing homes, one of the key supportive services is home care. And that is people with disabilities, including those who have significant disabilities, someone with paralysis, a spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, might often need help with what we call activities of daily living, ADL. And a home care attendant who works for an agency or directly for the consumer, the person with the disability, will come into the home and provide support services to help that person with the activities of daily living. Could be personal hygiene, getting dressed, meal preparation, light housekeeping, getting someone ready to go to part-time or full-time work outside the home. So our home care agency, Liberty Home Care, or Home Choices, serves about 600 people with disabilities with a workforce of about 800 attendants or home care workers, caregivers, who work with seniors and people with disabilities to help them live independently. Also, we have the skills training programs, support group, which is sort of a peer-to-peer model where people with disabilities are sharing their experience and recommendations with other people with disabilities. And we have a budget skill training program so that people who maybe moved out of a nursing home for the first time and have never had a monthly budget or a checking account learn how to manage a basic budget to make sure that they're paying their utilities, paying their phone bill, and keeping a positive cash flow to keep their home or make their rent payments. So the skills training courses are very important. We have housing counseling as well to help people keep their credit in good standing. And we also, for the few homeowners, as Christi mentioned, many people in Philadelphia are not in a home ownership option. They are tenants that pay monthly rent. But there are folks who are low income who are being gentrified out of neighborhoods that are really finding it hard to make ends meet, make their mortgage payments, pay their property taxes. And for those folks, we have housing counseling and a mortgage foreclosure diversion program to keep them in their homes. So the gentrification and the tax abatement issue are definitely big challenges in the city, and it's really an inequity that you see sort of the consequences of the tax abatement giving tax breaks perhaps to the people who least need it, where you have people who have lived in a neighborhood for decades and are paying their fair share of property tax each year. And these are our seniors, people with disabilities, our policemen, firemen, civil service workers, low to moderate income households that are really struggling to make those property taxes each year. So the tax abatement challenges in the city really need to be looked at and changed.
Yeah, in addition, I would say people paying taxes in those neighborhoods for many years and seeing no improvement to the roads, to the schools, to the parks and libraries in their neighborhoods until this development happens. And so it's important, yeah, to kind of understand what it feels like to be in the shoes of somebody who's been a lifelong resident of those neighborhoods and who's doing what they're supposed to be doing in terms of their financial responsibility. Christi, I want you to tell people how they can apply for housing. So if somebody is listening or watching our program and they say, hey, I'm a woman and I would be interested in this program, and what do they do to begin, and how would they connect with your organization?
Yeah, for folks specifically interested in living in WCRP housing, we house families, so folks need to have dependents under the age of 18 and cannot make more than $40,000 a year for a family of four. And if folks want to apply, our applications are open on Wednesdays from 9 to 3 at our property management office, which is 2036 North 4th Street.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And what about for Liberty Resources? How can people connect with Liberty Resources and who's eligible?
Yes. For Liberty Resources, we actually have a housing development corporation, Liberty Housing Development Corporation, which acquires and develops affordable, accessible housing. We just recently broke ground in West Philadelphia at 52nd and Poplar, and we're going to be building 24 units of affordable housing there. That will include accessible, and all the units will be visitable. Our website is www.libertyresources.org, and our headquarters are located right in Chinatown at the corner of 8th and Arch, 112 8th Street, North 8th Street, Suite 600, and our hours are 8 to 5 p.m. each day, and our main phone number is 215-634-2000. And to be eligible for housing, it's really low income, area median income, and most of the folks, as we mentioned, that we serve are earning below or at a poverty level. So their eligibility for housing subsidies and vouchers through HUD and the Philadelphia Housing Authority are very important. And the challenges in the city are, continuing to grow. Our coalition just unveiled a study or an updated report call to action on the housing crisis in the city of Philadelphia and the lack of affordable housing for low-income households. And I believe that over 53% of the city households now are cost burden, where they are paying more than 30% of their monthly income into their housing costs. The other sort of thing or important feature of the city of Philadelphia is that we've just recently been recognized as having the highest poverty rate of any major U.S. city.
Yeah, we are the biggest, poorest city in the country.
And additionally, we also have the highest percentage of people with disabilities. 16% of the city's population are people with disabilities. So that's why increased funding for the Housing Trust Fund is so important, and we really hope to see additional funds come into the trust fund through City Council and Mayor Kenny.
Now, we've been talking a lot about Philadelphia. Are there anything that you're advocating for at the state or federal level that would also impact housing in the city? We often take trips to Harrisburg and DC when it comes to media issues and access to communication. Tell us about anything that you might be aware of in terms of things that are happening in Harrisburg at the state level or with HUD at the federal government level.
Yeah, there are two bills at the state level that would impact resources for affordable and accessible housing development. So one is that there is also a state housing trust fund. There's a city one, but also one at the state. And that bill was passed a number of years ago, but there are folks who are working to try and raise the cap on the amount of money that the state housing trust fund has. Right now it has about $25 million a year. And raising the cap could generate millions more dollars for low-income housing development. The other thing is a state housing tax credit. So a lot of low-income housing development gets funded through low-income housing tax credits, which is a federal program. And so we are hoping to get a similar program created at the state level to add additional resources.
And Tom, is there anything happening with disabilities or with housing?
Yes. An area where we've had some advocacy is to increase the number of housing vouchers that are available to the city of Philadelphia. It's very important for low-income people with disabilities to have a housing voucher to help pay for their rent, so that they're not paying more than 30% of their fixed monthly income. So getting the housing an increased number of housing vouchers from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development is a big push, and we've tried to get HUD to issue vouchers specifically for nursing home transition people, people who are unnecessarily living in expensive nursing facilities when they could live in a more desired community setting. So that's a big push that we're always focused on.
Yeah, I want to add two things or two areas to that list because my parents both work in the field of mental health and substance abuse. And that's a housing issue as well in terms of getting more federal, state, and local resources for people that would like inpatient care for substance use disorders and for mental health care. That's another issue people are also advocating for to get more resources and units and beds for people to be able to stay at those locations. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk more with Tom Earle of Liberty Resources and Christi Clark of the Women's Community Revitalization Project here on the People Power Lunch Hour on Philly Cam TV and WPPM. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the People Power Lunch Hour. For the past 45 minutes or so, we've been talking about all the different ways we can address the lack of access to affordable housing here in the city. We have two amazing organizations, the Women's Community Revitalization Project, Liberty Resources, and this great coalition, the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities, working with many, many, many groups here in the city, a very diverse coalition that is working and fighting to make sure that Philadelphians have more accessible housing and affordable housing here in the city. So before we wrap up, again, People Power Lunch Hour is an invitation to all of our listeners and viewers out there to plug into this work. If this is an issue that you care about, there are many organizations working every day to fight for our rights. And so, Christi, please tell people how people can get involved in the work. What are some of the needs that you're looking to fill? How can people who want to volunteer plug in?
Yeah, so really the best way for folks to plug in is to get involved with one of the organizations that's a member of our coalition. So our coalition's website is phillyaffordablecommunities.org, and you will find a list of all 65 organizations and links to their websites that are a part of our coalition. We really see this as about building power, people power in a movement for housing justice across the city, but also building up the power of the organizations that are a part of the coalition. So we encourage you to see if there's an organization from your neighborhood or from your part of the city or addressing a specific piece of the housing issue that you want to address and join that organization. If you are already a part of an organization that is not a member of our coalition, we invite you to join with us in this fight for more resources for affordable and accessible housing.
And how can folks plug in with Liberty Resources? Do y'all have volunteers or ways for people to support the work that you are doing?
Yes, we have volunteers, people with disabilities come in and help us with different tasks at the organization, including mailing and other programs to spread the word of independent living. They're also welcome to participate in our skills training programs, our support groups. Our services and programs are free, and we welcome people with disabilities to come to our center at 112 North 8th Street and see what we have to offer. and they can get involved also with the Coalition for Affordable Communities. Many of our board members are involved, and the people we served are involved, have testified at city council hearings, and have also made visits with members of city council to make sure that our issues are explained to members of city council and other elected officials and agency officials.
And I would also add that for the Women's Community Revitalization Project in particular, we have an advocacy committee that meets monthly, second Monday of the month from 6 to 8 p.m., where we do a combination of political education, skill building, and that's really how WCRP plugs into the Coalition for Affordable Communities. So if folks have interest in joining that committee, you can reach out to us at 215-627-5550.
Are there any big plans for the future or any events or initiatives that you want to highlight before we go?
Sure. As a matter of fact, this week is Disability Pride Week in Philadelphia. And this afternoon at 4:30 at City Hall, the northeast corner of City Hall, there'll be the disability flag raising to kick off this week of Pride for people with disabilities, celebrating our lives in the community and being proud of our disabilities and our differences. And this Saturday at 10 a.m. at the National Constitution Center, there'll be the Disability Pride Rally and Parade that will go from the Constitution Center up to City Hall. And there'll be fun events there for families, children, and people with disabilities throughout the day at City Hall.
And I would also just add that for the Coalition for Affordable Communities, we typically have an action on the first day of City Council. So City Council is just coming to the end of their session and we'll take a summer recess. But at the end of September, we'll be going back to City Hall, making sure that they're really clear that housing is an issue that's not going away and we need them to address it. So if folks follow us on our Facebook page, we'll make sure that we keep you up to date about when and where that's happening.
And Vanessa, the other thing that an innovative approach to sort of the land and property challenges in the city of Philadelphia has been the city's land bank. And our Taking Back Vacant Land Coalition, which was sort of a predecessor to this campaign, helped establish a land bank in the city of Philadelphia to help address the issue of about 40,000 vacant pieces of blighted land in the city of Philadelphia, and the goal of repurposing that land for affordable, accessible housing as well. So we're very involved with pushing for the implementation of the land bank, and there's areas of improvement that could help increase the distribution of those vacant properties to housing developers, especially community development organizations like Liberty Housing Development Corporation and WCRP to use those properties for affordable, accessible housing in the future.
Yeah, as opposed to selling them to real estate developers, at the highest bid. And we've talked to many residents who are already working on those lands with gardens and parks and things. So we know that people in those communities value that land that's already part of their neighborhoods. I want to thank you both for all the work that you do and for sharing all of this great information. And this is really a message for our listeners and viewers. If you're somebody that is experiencing access issues when it comes to affordable housing, definitely check out the Coalition for Affordable Communities. There's a great listing of all the organizations working on these issues there. Also, look at the Women's Community Revitalization Project, Liberty Resources. There's many more organizations. And for people that are maybe not experiencing any of these issues, there's always an opportunity for you to speak to your elected officials about these issues and share your concerns and some of the proposals that you think might address these issues. It's not hard. You can always call, email, tweet, or visit their offices to be more connected and civically engaged all these issues. If you can, just give your websites one more time and your location, and so people who are watching and viewing can know how to get in touch with you all.
Sure. So for the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities, the website is phillyaffordablecommunities.org. For the Women's Community Revitalization Project, it's wcrppphila.org.
And for Liberty Resources, we're at 112 North A Street, Suite 600. And our website is www.libertyresources.org. And our main phone number is 215-634-2000.
Okay, and don't forget this week, Disability Pride Week in Philadelphia. There's a really great website called disabilitypridephiladelphia.com. It has the entire calendar of events, including the 2 events that Tom outlined today. At 4:30, the flag raising. This weekend, the rally and march in Center City. Make sure you check that out. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the People Power Lunch Hour Show. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber, thanking you for watching and listening. If you'd like to look at more episodes of the People Power Lunch Hour Show or learn more about what we do here at PhillyCam to make media more accessible to everyone, you can visit our website at phillycam.org. You can also follow us on social media at PhillyCam. If you want to follow WPPM, we're at WPPM FM. And we also have a YouTube page with all of our past videos and many more great videos on all of these different subjects. So please support your local community media center. And if you're interested in making your own media, telling your story, or you'd like to be a guest on the show, email us at info@phillycam.org. All right. Thanks again for listening. Keep it locked here.